talk about bioscience innovation for both medical and commercial impact coming out of academia. And with an industry perspective, I've been looking at the barriers and the things that we can do better in the academic sector to exploit innovation more within the UK and Imperial College ecosystem. Remarkably, there are very many great inefficiencies and problems there. Now, I know they will be different here, but I have tried to identify and generalize the things that may be of value to Greece. So let's start by saying, τι μπορεί να μας φέρει η έρευνα, right? This is why biomedical products are absolutely enormous human market. We have an appetite and a need. And pharmaceutical sales last year reached $1.6 trillion. Medical devices and diagnostics, $500 billion. And digital health is quite difficult to assess, but it's growing at a much more rapid rate. And these are all growing, driven by scientific advances, aging society, and growing demand in emerging markets. Innovation is really what's driving a healthcare revolution, and there's a major route of innovation going from academia through spin-outs into corporates. 80% of the clinical pharmaceutical pipeline is now from biotech, and there's expansion of this tremendous flood of new innovations in new areas that will transform medicine. It's continuing in pharmaceuticals, it's going to medical devices, diagnostics, health tech is big, and then there's a whole range of hybrid technologies which bring two or more of these together, which will be new for many of us to deal with. I'd like to show you in a very concrete way the transformation that's happened in the pharma industry since I was in there. These are the top 10 selling drugs in 2003. Interestingly, that Pfizer had 5 of them. The top selling drug was for dyslipidemia and is one that many people take now. But these are all small molecule drugs. That was a previous generation of drugs, novel chemical entities. And they're in a number of areas with Me Too drugs from different companies. And in fact, some of these drugs were successors to previous drugs of the same type. Now let's move on 20 years. And I've colored here in blue the drugs that originated in biotech. You can see 80% of the top 10 drugs originated in biotech. And I've colored in yellow the ones that are not small molecule white powders. And you can see, again, 80%. So there's some things you recognize there. There's the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, a messenger RNA, and there are 6 monoclonal antibodies and a peptide, Ozempic, from Novo Nordisk, which is transforming the economy of Denmark and perturbing it significantly. So these new types of drugs are called new modalities, and they allow you to explore new biology and treat diseases which were not accessible before. And I'd just like to illustrate how that came out of academic innovation. Actually, in 1975, I was an undergraduate at Cambridge when hybridoma technology was invented by Kohler and Milstein, and that was the start. That couldn't really make a drug because that was a mouse antibody, even though it was put into humans in 1986. What had to happen was a series of other technologies that changed the mouse antibody to make it more human so that you wouldn't get immune rejection. And the key one was humanization technology from Greg Winter in 1986. And it was really after that that you started being able to make drugs. There were waves of other technologies which did that even better. For example, a mouse that could make human antibodies, and you could do it by immunization. The drugs came about 11 years after those inventions. And waves of these technologies. And what they did is quite remarkable. There are over 100 products, antibody products registered, includes antibody drug conjugates, and there are several hundred in development. This is a cumulative graph showing the growth of total monoclonal antibody products, currently worth over 160 billion and projected to go to 300 billion. One of them, the biggest selling drug now, Keytruda, I have been closely involved with in some way, in that I was a trustee of the charity LifeArc, which made it by humanizing an antibody made by Organon, first approved in 2014, and the biggest class of drugs now. It was the start of a whole new class that is growing, will grow to over the $55 billion market by 2028. But what we managed to do, because LifeArc, the charity, was getting 2% royalty, was to sell that royalty to a Canadian pension fund and bring in over $1.3 billion into the charity, which now is distributing it for translational work in the UK. I know this is a dream for Greece, but the thing is that this really took a long time to happen in the UK and reached a completely different level. The antibody revolution spawned a whole new set of different types of products from the antibody, and that led to more new modalities. And then this is where I stop with this first section. There are more new modalities. We've heard of some of them in this conference. We've heard of gene therapy, CAR T, there's RNA therapies, antisense, bispecifics, antibody drug conjugates. This is a list of drug approvals of those new modalities. And they will change the face of therapy, but behind these, not yet approved, and still in early stages, are, I don't know, 20 to 50 other new modalities. The face of medicine and therapeutics is changing completely. There are people all over the world designing new modalities which address new biology. So that really is in a very real way how academic invention through then biotech led to a profound change in medicine. Now let's change completely and look at the roots and steps in commercializing academic research. I'm very engaged with that at Imperial College now. If you have an invention, ideally with IP protection, but it could be another barrier to competition, then what can you do with it? You can actually sometimes just publish and say that's good enough, will have the impact humanity will benefit. You can create a spin-out, but you can also license, and you can also get money to develop a product in academia for longer with funding. That is definitely a route that you see, and then you might commercialize it later. What I would say about licensing is it doesn't often, it doesn't work all that frequently from academia because corporate companies, which tend to be the people who license, like to see something developed in an industrial environment where the product is developed to a certain industry standard. So while it can be done, it's a more difficult route. In some cases, though, much easier to do than creating a whole new company with all the risks that entails. Here is the area, these are the areas in the biomedical sector which are invested in. And I have here some figures in US and Europe in 2023. And if you look at this table in the middle, you've got biopharma, which is biotech, medicines essentially, diagnostics and tools, and that includes tools for biopharma discovery, medical devices and health tech. And the total deals is over 46 billion, 47 billion. And of that money, almost half goes to biopharma. And the next one really is health tech, and then medical devices, and then diagnostics and tools. I won't talk about the other dynamics, but you know, the market is getting more difficult. Investors are focusing on fewer companies and later stages. I've tried to draw up here the different sectors that can be spun out or invested in, and what that means for a company or a technology spinning out. And I've split them here in these four categories: biotech, pharma, tools, medtech, which is devices and diagnostics, and health tech or digital health. One thing that distinguishes these categories is the boxes on the right. In those cases, the companies tend to go to revenue generation quite soon, and that's a different kind of company. And in the left, it's about growth of technology, and then maybe selling on something much more valuable. Now, this is a generalization, but that is roughly true, and there's a different kind of person who does either. Biotech pharma needs by far the highest academic investment. So for a country that has a lot of biomedical academic investment. That is a good one. It's also very high risk and high return, but it's an established business model with multiple exit points. So even though it might fail at the end, there are places where it could be sold way before to sell the risk to somebody else and cash in some money. And it does require major investment. A typical first financing, and this is the average for 2023, is about $25 million first financing. Now, compare that with what you see here, and actually I'd say in the UK, a typical first financing in this sector is under £10 million. It should probably be over £10 million. Medical devices is different. It is probably higher, lower risk, lower return. The first financing can be low, but actually the average has been quite high. The level of academic investment is less. Pharma tools and services, the academic investment can be low because these could be a contract research organization run by the academics. And you don't have the product risk. In health tech and digital health, I think this is a major growth area. And the academic investment can be low, but the investment to returns, to revenue, could be high. You have to set up a powerful sales organization and develop the science. A little bit here on the areas that investors are investing in, and platforms in therapeutics has been quite important, though now they say they're off them and more into therapeutic assets, but I think the reason is they're investing more late. Now, what do you need for a spin-out system? And these are the fundamental underpinnings. These are the fundamentals of a spin-out system. And I would say they are largely in place in the UK, but not completely. You need high-quality academia with a translational outlook. They need to want to do this and understand what to do. You need tech transfer offices that are enabling and not gatekeepers, and they're resourced well enough and they don't act as gatekeepers. You need an international outlook. You need a talented workforce to take on a company. You need innovation clusters help an awful lot. They support every step of this. They bring in the workforce. They bring in advisors. You can learn off people who've done it before. You need seed investors. You want a good legal framework that can operate very quickly. You want to set up a company quickly. You want the legal framework for recruitment to be simple. You want to be able, if you hire people initially, that you don't have to keep them forever. Favorable tax regime, both for the executives and the company, is very useful, and certainly the UK has used that a lot. And there are other elements of the infrastructure. So these are things that underpinning, and usually I wouldn't talk about them as things to improve on because you assume they're there, but I don't know whether these are here in Greece. And I suspect that the tech transfer offices, which was a barrier in the UK, may still be a barrier here. And there are other elements here which may not be in place, which need to be put in place. And if so, they are fundamental. Now, what happens during creation of a company? Well, interestingly, when I went to Imperial College, I found that I built companies by working with academics, and many of the academics there didn't really know how to do this and thought, I'll make a company, I won't need any money, and I'll be the CEO, and we'll see how it goes after that. So, of course, to be really successful takes a lot more. You have an academic discovery, but the translational work needs to be done to validate the concept. You need to file patents, and you need to identify what the commercial potential is. Is there one? Do they know about the competition? Is there a need? Now, for this to happen, you really need an interaction, either with an entrepreneur who's interacting with them, or someone experienced, or perhaps an investor who's coming in to shape it, and maybe then introduce an entrepreneur. And with that, you get a business strategy, which is a broad outline, and a business plan, and that gets taken to investors. You, at one point, you pull together a syndicate, you form a company, you negotiate the equity and IP, and it all comes together and gets signed on the same day, and you've got the seed investment completed. So quite a lot of stakeholders have to be incentivized to work together. And you need the entrepreneur to be willing to come in and look at it and not be scared off, and you want a good one. I'm going to move on and talk about the things that can go wrong and how we address them. Well, some key enablers. Well, if the quality of science is high, that helps a lot. And a credible and willing academic, and investors do like someone with a reputation. And so and I mean a good reputation. And even better if they've created companies before and they keep going back to them, and you see that many of the successful companies come again and again from clusters of people who work with each other. So that's very important, and timeliness is important because the invention has to be in time to fulfill its commercial potential. It's quite helpful to have a corporate already indicating that they're interested in this, so that ultimately they can become a customer and they can help shape your direction. But you've got to be very careful with that, because pharma companies, for example, that I was in, I would talk to them, but I wouldn't take what they would tell me as gospel. And in any case, which person in that company do you listen to? There are many views. You need a capable entrepreneur, and if you don't have one, and maybe the academic could be that entrepreneur, it does happen for sure. If not, you need somebody come in, and if you don't have one, that's a problem. And you need seed investor interest, and when you create a syndicate, it needs to be able to follow on, because when you then raise the next round, if there's no investor who can follow the money, then you're finding you have a cap table full of investors, you have to recreate it and bring a whole lot of new investors, and the new investors probably will not be attracted to what they see. So you have to set it up for scaling. Barriers, key barriers. Well, lack of translational proof of concept data is an absolutely critical barrier that's been identified right across the world, and people are trying to do something about it, and I'll tell you what we're trying to do. Weakness or complication in the IP package, no credible entrepreneur, it happens all the time. And in the UK, we've got a problem with Brexit. You don't, though, and so, if you set things up right, maybe that can be addressed. Disagreement on financial terms between the parties can lead to a very slow transaction. And space and hiring problems have actually hurt some of my companies. So these are some of the key barriers. And now I'm going to move on and tell you that these are the companies I built. The first two, Crescendo and Microbiotica, Crescendo was a spin-out of the Baber Institute at Cambridge, Microbiotica, the Sanger Institute at Cambridge. I worked with the academics. In the case of Microbiotica, I was in there over a year, talking to them, getting patents filed, building the plan, and negotiating, and then ran it for 6 years. We got a deal with Genentech in the first 18 months. So these two companies are still going and are in the clinic, and the first one has a POC in topical psoriasis for a product that's really quite transformational, new modality. And then the third one is also another new modality. It's cell therapy based on NK cells, technology that has identified the control points to make these cells to be properly active in sufficient amounts. And there, the companies. So some of the experiences from these companies are you do need a substantial seed investment to reach milestones, build a proper team who can then raise the next money, and provide contingency if you don't get the data in time. It's difficult if the founding investors cannot follow on to Series A. And so at the very least, you want them to be able to attract Series A investors, either in the first syndicate or in the next syndicate. Finding a CEO after foundation is more difficult. If they come in at foundation, they have equity, they have skin in the game and emotional commitment. Coming in afterwards when it's already got going is difficult, unless it's much later. Incomplete technology development is an issue, and in two of my companies we've had to either engineer or re-engineer the technology to make it work. Fundraising seriously affected by timing, both in the general, someone mentioned 2012, 2013, I was fundraising for Crescendo there, it was hell. But it was worse because our company, although it had very good technology, was a little bit behind the time of the competitors. And the investors had placed their bets. And in the case of microbiotica, failures in the sector in the clinic with more advanced companies in the US led to complete blackout in investment. We still managed to get 50 million in 2022, but I went all over the world for that. So those were some specific learnings, and I'm going to look at this in a more strategic way for what we're looking to do. So 3 areas I'm going to talk about strategically addressing the barriers. The first one is gap in pre-commercialization support of the science. Widely recognized problem, both in finishing the science and in understanding the commercial positioning, so you know where to position and how to position it to investors. The UK government has put in money in this field with a number of initiatives. I won't go through them, and some charities as well. And then universities have accelerators where they run a kind of system of training, and they give you a little bit of money and they help you. We have one from MedTech at Imperial, K2 Labs at the Crick Institute does digital health. That's widely open to people. But there is a gap in project-managed, commercially focused science funding and support, and commercial support, with non-dilutive funding, and there's some new solutions out there. I'm involved with the Crick Institute, and we're spending 50 million donation from a foundation for this type of thing. And at Imperial College, we've set up something called the Institute for Deep Tech Entrepreneurship. The gap in pre-commercialization support, this is just to illustrate visually. There are all sorts of other things you can use. Accelerators, entrepreneurs and residents can help with the commercial positioning. And we put in a program. This is the program I just mentioned, and we're both funding with small amounts of money, up to £80,000, and giving advice to get programs investor ready. The next barrier is making the spin-out process in terms more entrepreneur friendly. The government about a year ago decided that, well, firstly, it's been supporting the life science sector as a strategic sector in the UK for a long time, but decided that the spin-out areas were being held back by the universities being too greedy in terms of equity they kept. And it got out into the public, the national press, and slow negotiation spin-out. So they put a huge amount of political pressure, and they set up a review with the Vice Chancellor of Oxford, Irene Tracy, and Andrew Williamson of Cambridge Innovation Capital. And they came out with a report, and there was a guide on new spin-out terms and processes that came out from 10 universities together. And the tech transfer officers were told to not use spin-outs to generate revenue, but they should enable the spin-outs, and they should just be funded by the central government funds which are available for that. So that was they were really told not to squeeze the new companies like a lemon, but to make them happen. At Imperial College, we changed the spin-out terms to make the equity more favorable for academic founders. We wrote a new process called Founder's Choice. And as an example, the equity share kept by the college was reduced from 50% to either 10 or 20%. 20% for pharma, 10% for all the others. And the spin-out terms were made standard, the sub-licensing terms better, and there was a commitment to a rapid process. So we're operating that now, and there's been a shift because the universities have been told, get on with it and don't be a barrier. I think this could be relevant to any country, really. The gap in funding. Well, it's interesting, but if you talk to a blue chip VC, there will never be a problem to fund a good company. And then I said, well, what areas do you fund in? He said, well, we don't do cell therapy, we don't do gene therapy, we're not doing much oncology, but we like neurology and cardiology a lot. And now all the rest is like the later stage more. So the result is that there is a shortage of early stage investment in the UK, and there probably is everywhere. And it's, I don't think, true that every good company will get funded. So what has happened in the UK is that universities have set up their own funds. There's an acute challenge. It's worse outside Oxford, Cambridge, and London. They've set up their own funds, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. To aid investment, the British Business Bank started, I guess they took the place of the European Investment Bank, and they started a scheme during COVID to provide co-investment, to encourage investment during a difficult time. And then they did a follow-on fund, which has provided more scale-up money. And the third thing they've done is copy what France has done with the TIBI initiative to essentially tell the pension funds that they should put a proportion of their pension investment into the VC area. We'll see if that happens because it's voluntary, but the pressure was on. So what about the growth of institution-focused VC funds? Now, in a way, they're similar to like a fund for Greece, but this is a fund for a university. And they've grown all around the world. The Japanese have quite a few. I've listed just a few here. I mean, there's the well-known The Engine at MIT, Harvard. And some of them are very closely associated with a university like Oxford Science Enterprises. And the example on the right shows that they managed to raise 850 million in capital on some great enthusiasm years back. Initially, they had trouble spending it. But they've got 60 people mining the Oxford ecosystem and finding things to put the money in. And they've had a several-fold increase in spin-out numbers and a six-fold increase in incoming external investors from other VCs. So they've had some successes, and I think that there's a feeling that it's going to be necessary to exploit what the universities are doing. So we're setting up at Imperial College Science Capital. I'm leading the negotiation to form it. And surprise, surprise, the managing partner of that will be Alexis Xerofoglos, who is British Greek from Oxford. He was the second in command at Oxford Science Enterprises. And the chair will be Lord David Pryor, who is a health minister and is in investment. And that is going ahead, and we should be setting up next year. I'm coming to the end. I've just got some concluding thoughts. This is really a quick pass. And I've got some thoughts here, and that's really all they are, because I don't know that much about the Greek system, I'm only guessing, but I know some of the issues we face that I know better are relevant, and I know the process well. Firstly, I think that every country can and should be involved in biomedical commercialization, no question. We're all involved in health, and every country has a health system. And that health system can be a customer, a source of data, and a collaborator in innovation, and it should be exploited fully. The UK has a great strength there, but it's not exploiting it very well. There is a problem, and that's next on the agenda to solve in the UK, but it's not solved. And it could even be that it's easier to solve here, I don't know. If you were to run clinical trials for companies, then the question is, do you have enough patients to justify that? But maybe early clinical trial units would be a way to add quite a lot of value. Countries that have gone down in this field have tended to start with contract research organizations and generic medicines. China's a classic example, and moved progressively to innovation, but playing to their strengths. So while we should learn by what's been done in more advanced systems, it shouldn't be copied. You can't cut down your own oak tree to grow some pines, right? I think you need to preserve what you have and build on it. And I think building around existing prime industry, and we talk a lot about prime companies, AstraZeneca and GSK are primes. And one reason we've got a good biotech sector is because they're there in the middle of it, and it feeds together and protects it. Without them, it might be washed away. I mean, the companies do get sucked out all the time to the US. So you can't avoid that, and that's a problem the UK has and you will have, but working with the primes is a good idea. The pharma sector has been dominant, or rather biopharma, but is dependent on long-term academic investment, although sometimes maybe that can be imported with the person coming in. But then you've got the question about getting experienced management and getting major commercial investment here, and do the investors have confidence that the management here and the system can deploy it. But there are other ways it could be done. Digital health is clearly the most rapidly growing sector. I showed you the figures. I've seen tremendous strength here. and it does require less pre-commercial investment, though it still requires significant investment to finalize the validation of whatever it is, technology, and set up the sales properly. So with that, I conclude.